Hi, 5th and 6th grade. We are going on to 9.3 in social studies today, which is Christianity among Black Americans. So if you can open up your book with me to 157, have your questions sheet nearby as well, so you'll be ready to just go through those with me at the end, and then you can go ahead and answer them on your own. So starting at 9.3, Christianity among Black Americans. Many Black Americans distinguish themselves as servants of God. Often, a plantation owner's wife would teach some of the slave children to read and write using the Bible as a reading text. Others learned to read and write in their churches and in Sunday schools. Some of these young blacks developed a great ability to expound the scriptures, and God called them to preach. The Methodist, Presbyterian, and Baptist churches pioneered church planting programs among the Black communities, as well as the training of Black preachers. Locke Carey, Black missionary to Africa. In 1807, a young slave named Locke Carey, who lived from 1780 to 1828, accepted Christ and was baptized at the First Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. A white member of the church taught Carey to read from the New Testament, and Carey soon became a licensed Baptist preacher. Through his hard work and help from his merchant friends, Locke Carey bought his freedom in 1813. He also purchased the freedom of his children, but by this time his wife had died. After learning of the missionary efforts in West Africa, he founded the African Baptist Missionary Society of Richmond. By 1821, Locke Carey owned a prospering farm, preached to slaves throughout the surrounding countryside, and eventually pastored a predominantly Black congregation in Richmond. But Carey felt burdened for Africa. The forerunner of the Southern Baptist Convention decided to sponsor him as a missionary to the newly found colony of Liberia. Locke Carey's longtime friend and associate preacher, Colin Teague, also a Black American, volunteered to go with him. In his farewell sermon, Carey preached from Romans 8:32 about God's gift of his Son and our obligation to give ourselves. I am about to leave you and expect to see your faces no more. I long to preach to the poor Africans the way of life and salvation. I don't know what may befell me, whether I may find the grave in the ocean or among the savage men or more savage wild beasts on the coast of Africa, nor am I anxious what may become of me. I feel it is my duty to go. The Savior may ask, where have you been? What have you been doing? Have you endeavored to the utmost of your ability to fulfill the commandments I gave you? Locke Carey and Colin Teague sailed for Africa on January 23, 1821. After arriving in Liberia, they started a church in Monrovia, the capital city, named for American President James Monroe. They preached the gospel and also built schools. Carey later became the governor of Liberia. He managed to fulfill his civic duties in the government, but always gave first priority to his preaching. He became known as the father of Western African missions. Locke Carey was killed in an accidental explosion in 1828 and buried near the town of Carysburg, Liberia, which was named in his honor. The Foreign Mission Board to the Southern Baptist Convention marked his grave with a marble stone in 1851. Visitors to Liberia can still visit the gravesite. Because of Locke Carey's dedication and burden, many missionaries followed in his footsteps to Northwest Africa to spread the gospel. Some famous Black preachers. Lemuel Hayes, a patriot and preacher. You already know one famous Black preacher, Lemuel Hayes, 1753 to 1833. As a young man studying for the ministry, Hayes was called to serve as a Minuteman in the American War for Independence. Like many other Massachusetts citizens, he first took up arms to defend his home, and later, as a soldier in the Continental Army under George Washington, to fight for his country. After the war, he completed his studies and became a well-known pastor and writer in New England. During the Second Great Awakening, Lemuel Hayes had held revivals in Vermont and Connecticut. John Jasper in Richmond. In 1839, a slave by the name of John Jasper 1812 to 1901, came to know Christ as his Savior after hearing the gospel in the Capitol Square of Richmond, Virginia. Using an old spelling book, he taught himself to read. Jasper studied the Bible so thoroughly that one minister said of him, "It did seem to me sometimes that Reverend Jasper came into the Word with a Bible in his heart, head, and tongue." Jasper eventually committed much of the scriptures to memory. Jasper, while still a slave, began preaching whenever he could to find a congregation, often at funerals where he could minister to sorrowing families. When the Civil War raged, he ministered to wounded soldiers in the Confederation hospital. After the war, he preached in churches throughout Virginia, Maryland, and New Jersey. He once preached before the entire Virginia General Assembly. Multitudes came to hear the fiery black preacher. Many received Christ as their Savior after hearing Jasper's vivid descriptions of hell. John Chavis and education. John Chavis, 1960-something to 1838, was a freed black man with great abilities. He was born in Virginia and attended Washington Academy, now Washington and Lee University, in Lexington, Virginia, where he studied to become a Presbyterian minister. In 1801, the Presbyterian Church of the United States appointed Chavis to be a missionary to other blacks. He went on to minister first in Virginia and later in North Carolina, preaching in churches. In North Carolina, he founded a preparatory school for white students and a night school for black children. Among his pupils at the preparatory school were a future United States Senator and Charles Manley, the future governor of North Carolina. And up at the top, there's a box with a profile of Catherine Ferguson, Sunday school teacher and friend of orphans. 8-year-old Catherine Katie Ferguson, unknown birth to 1854, said goodbye to her mother, a black slave, for the last time when another family purchased the woman and took her away. But Katie did not allow her loss to make her bitter. From that day forward, she felt compassion for orphans of any race. Although Katie Ferguson did not know it at the time, God intended for her to use her loss for his glory. God had placed Katie in the possession of a kind woman who took her to church and encouraged her spiritual development. When Katie was 16 years old, God sent another compassionate woman to purchase the girl's freedom. But Katie's lessons were not yet over. 2 years later, Katie married and started a family on her own. Though she had 2 children, both died as infants. The loss of her children motivated Katie to begin a great work for God. In 1793, Katie began holding a Sunday school for local children in her home. This is believed to be New York City's first Sunday school program. As the work grew, a local pastor learned that Katie needed more room and offered the use of his church basement. Soon, the Murray Street Sabbath School was thriving every Sunday morning, and on Sunday afternoons and on Fridays, Katie taught children in her home. In addition to her teaching, Katie helped place a total of 48 starving children into good homes that could better meet their needs. The Katie Ferguson Home for Unwed Mothers was founded in 1920 in honor of this dedicated, compassionate woman. It's pretty amazing to think that she started this really when she was young, but from age 16 on, she started really feeling a call to orphans, which God calls us to take care of throughout the scriptures. All right, on to the bottom of the page. America's own music, the spirituals. As black slaves in the South heard sermons from scriptures, they applied to themselves the stories of the Hebrew children enslaved in Egypt. Suffering the hardships of slavery, many turned to the Lord as a source of their strength. In order to help his children endure their bondage, God gave them the gift of spirituals, which are recognized as America's greatest contribution in the field of music. The slaves would sing these melodic, rhythmic songs together as they worked on plantations. Some of the best loved spirituals are Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. I'm sure you've heard that. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. And Deep River and Go Down Moses. Another one I'm sure you've heard is, I went down in the river to pray, studying about them good old ways, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, brother, let's go down, come on down. Come on, brother, let's go down, down to the river to pray. So these songs that we hear all started from slave plantations and from black congregations writing these songs that they would chant and sing together as they worked on the plantation as a reminder of the hope that they had in the Lord. The song Go Down Moses is a good example of the comparison between the slavery of the Hebrew children and that of black people. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. When a spiritual spoke of freedom, it referred to the spiritual freedom of life with the Savior. In fact, the slave who was a Christian had more freedom than any free person who was not slaved. By first giving them the spiritual freedom, God was preparing the slaves for their upcoming physical freedom. In later years, several talented black Americans put together collections of spirituals, which can be found in the works of James Weldon Johnson, 1871 to 1938, John Wesley Work Sr., 1873 to 1925, and Harry T. Burleigh, 1866 to 1949. The Fisk Jubilee Singers of Tennessee introduced the spirituals to the northern states and Europe beginning in 1871. Some of America's most beloved musical performers have included spirituals in their musical repertoire, such as the great black American opera stars Martin Anderson, 1897 to 1993, and Mary Leontin Price, 1927 to present day. Some questions for you to answer today. First, identify former slave who became known as the father of Western African missions. 2, identify the black slave who preached in Civil War hospitals. 3, identify America's greatest contribution to the field of music. And 4, identify the women said to have founded New York's first Sunday school. All right, when you're done that and we come back together next time, we're going to be on 9.4, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Rocky Mountains. We're going to be going on talking about the Louisiana Purchase, talking a little bit more about Lewis and Clark, one of my favorite stories, the War of 1812, and the United States gaining Florida, the Alamo. There's so much in this section. So I look forward to researching that with you and learning more about it. Thank you.